Alright, so for this next part, we're going to take a look at the BorderPane layout. So the way that I want to go about approaching this is that I want to first show you just a general structure for each one of the different regions, how this is actually formatted in your application window, and then also take a look at a piece of code that I've already built that just kind of shows the initial setup for adding content to a border pane. And the primary part that I want to focus on is going to be the part where we actually construct a border pane object and start putting some content into it. And we'll take a look at the two different ways that we can approach adding content to a border pane. So one of those ways is going to be with a constructor, where we just add all of the content at once. And then another is with a combination of a constructor and a series of setter methods to add each one of the pieces of content individually. So the way that the border pane layout is going to work is we're going to have our application window, and this is going to be divided up into 5 different regions. So we're going to have a top region right here, we'll have a bottom region down here, we're going to have a left region off to the side, we'll have a right region on the other side, and then in the middle we'll have a center region. So we're going to have these 5 different regions for our border pane layout, and then to mark off the name for each of these. So we've got a top region right here. We've got a bottom region down here. We've got our center region right there. We have our left region right here. And finally, we have our right region right here. Okay. So the way this is going to work, when we talk about it with the constructor, so there are 2 different kinds of constructors that we can use to create a border pane layout. The first one that we're going to look at is a constructor that actually takes an argument or has a parameter for each one of these 5 regions. So it'll specify some content to place into each one of these 5 regions. The order that it's going to be in is that it starts with the center region, so that'll be the first parameter, and then it goes up to the top region, that'll be the second parameter, and then it'll go clockwise around the layout. So it'll go center, top, right, bottom, left, in that order. And the important thing to keep in mind is that for each one of these regions, when you're specifying some content to put into that region, you can only ever specify one thing that can go into it at a time. What I mean by that is that we can't have individual pieces, so like say individual controls, that we all try to pile into a single region at once. Instead, the way that you have to approach that is very similar to when you're dealing with a scene, where you'll need to put all of that content into, say, maybe some other kind of container, like a VBox or an HBox, and then you can put that one single container into one of these 5 regions. So the general idea would be, if you're going to do something for the top, because of the way that this is structured visually, it would generally make sense that you would use an HBox for the top, an HBox for the bottom, although in the example that I'm going to be using, I actually use a VBox. And then for the left and right, you'd use VBoxes for those. And then for the center, generally, because of the fact that the center is just everything else, it would really kind of depend contextually on the content that you put into the other 4 regions. But a few general ideas, you could do an HBox, a VBox, or perhaps even a grid pane for the center region. Okay. So now we'll go ahead and take a look at the example that I've got. So to start off with, I'll kind of work from the top and move down through all of the code that I've written here. So the first thing I want to look at is all of the different imports that I have to make. So we're still going to bring in our application, our stage, and our scene. So those 3 imports are still handled just the same as for any other JavaFX application. I then also have 3 imports for the different layouts that I'm going to use. So I'm going to have a border pane, since that's the example here. And I've also included an HBox and a VBox, since I want to go ahead and use those for some of the regions for this border pane. I then also have some controls as well as my images. So we're going to do a label, a button, and we'll also have an image view. And then I've also brought in the 2 classes that come from the geometry package. So we've got insets and pause, indicating that I'm going to be doing something with padding and alignment in this application. Okay. Next, we're going to have the header for this. So I've gone ahead and just called this something like web page. This is just a simple example. Essentially, the idea is that you could imagine this application as being sort of a sample construction of a web page if we were going to do that as if it were a JavaFX application. So some of the content here is going to kind of fit that, that general idea. So we've got our main method, our call to the launch method, we've got our start to the start method, and then instead of the start method, I've gone ahead and broken up the content that I'm going to put into each region using comments to kind of keep each one of those sections of code separated so we can easily distinguish one from the other. So the very first part is going to be for the top region content. So this is going to consist of a series of buttons that we could associate with, say, maybe some kind of navigation bar that you'd see on a typical web page. So I've got a home button, an about button, go ahead and correct that, a products button, and a contact button. Okay. And then I've gone ahead and made an hbox that I call header. So this essentially represents the header or the navigation bar for a web page. I'm using 10 pixels of spacing between each one of these buttons, and then I've gone ahead and put in each one of those 4 buttons for that hbox. In addition to that, I've also gone ahead and set some padding for this. So we're going to have 10 pixels of padding all around it. This is just to keep the buttons away from that upper leftmost edge of our application window. In the next section, for the center region, I'm just going to use some dummy text. So this is actually pretty standard dummy text that you'd see whenever somebody's doing sort of a rough draft of a web page in web development. They're using what's known as the lorem ipsum sample text. So I've gone ahead and just grabbed a little bit of that. I've also added some of these new line characters. So you'll notice a couple of these placed throughout the body of this text. And the reason for that is because of the fact that I need to make sure that this wraps at the appropriate points so that everything fits within that center region in the middle of the application window. I've also gone ahead and added some padding to this, so you can see that I'm actually specifying the padding for each side individually. The reason that I'm doing this is because I don't actually need any padding for the top and bottom of this particular application, or for this particular region in the application. I only want to apply the padding to the left and right sides of it. Okay. The next region that I focused on was the left region. So I'm using this as a sort of a navigational bar for that particular page. So you could kind of imagine if this were a much larger body of text in the center region, that this would be used to navigate to different paragraphs within it. So sort of like a table of contents, an interactive table of contents. So I've got 2 buttons here as just a simple example. So I've got one to navigate to the first paragraph, one to navigate to the second paragraph. I've then gone ahead and made a VBox to put them into. I call that VBox the left column. I'm using 10 pixels of padding, and then I've added these 2 buttons. I've gone ahead and made sure that the alignment is set to center, and then I'm also using a little bit of padding because of the fact that even if I center this on the left region, that's still going to be up against the leftmost edge of the application window. So I want to make sure that even though it's being centered, that it's still moved a little bit away from that edge. So I'm going to give it just 10 pixels of padding on that left edge. So you'll see that that's the only one of these 4 sides that I've applied any padding to. Okay. For the next region, I focused on the right region. For this one, I'm going to put in an image and a label. So the image that I'm using is going to be this JPEG that I've created right here. I've actually added that to my project. So again, if you want to be able to use this, make sure that you place this image file at the project directory, so placing it in the proper location so that you can access it. From there, I've got an image view that's going to make use out of that image that I've loaded into my program. I then also have a label that's going to go underneath it. I've essentially called this secondary content, so it kind of goes hand in hand with the primary content of the center region. And for this one, I've just added the first couple of words from that lorem ipsum sample text. I've also made sure that the aspect ratio is kept consistent for this image view, and then I've also adjusted the width of it to be just 200 pixels. You'll see that that kind of matches up with the overall width of the scene. So just making sure that this image doesn't essentially consume the entire application window. keeping it somewhat small and contained. And then similar to what I did for the left column, I have another VBox called right column. For this particular one, I actually went with 15 pixels of padding between the image and the text for it. So we've gone ahead and added those two things to that VBox. I've again gone ahead and set the alignment so that it's centered. And in this case, now I'm using 10 pixels of padding on the right edge to make sure that this is not pressed up against that rightmost edge of the application window. And then finally, I've got my bottom region content. So this is essentially going to be like a footer for my web page. So I've gone ahead and just put a little sort of placeholder to specify some kind of contact info. In this case, typically you might include something like, say maybe an address, an email address, and a phone number. And then I've also gone ahead and put in the copyright. So I've got the word copyright, and then you'll notice that I've done this little setup here where I'm typecasting the number 169 to be a char. 169 is actually the ASCII code for that copyright symbol, so the little C with a circle around it. And then I've taken these two labels, the contact info and the copyright, and I put those into a VBox that I call footer. Got 10 pixels of padding for this, and then I also go ahead and set the alignment to center that as well. Okay. So this is going to cover the content for each one of those 5 regions. And now we get into the part that is the most interesting as far as the primary purpose of this video is concerned, which is actually setting up the border pane. So in this particular case, for this first example, I've gone ahead and made my border pane object, calling it web page. It's going to be a new border pane, so we've got our constructor, and I put in each one of those 5 pieces of content. So we see primary content, this label that I used for the center region, that's going to be the first parameter. Then we have the header, which is for the top region, that's going to be the second parameter. We have our right column, so that's going to be this right region content. We have our footer for the bottom region, and then we have the left column for the left region's content. So we see that order of center, top, right, bottom, left. Okay. Then I'm going to go ahead and take that border pane, I'm going to put that into the scene. So this web page is going to serve as the root node for this particular application. I've then gone ahead and given it a width of 750 and a height of 300. And then finally we go ahead and set up our stage by setting the scene to be this scene object, setting the title to just be web page, and then I'm making sure that the stage, the window itself, is actually being displayed. Okay. So now that we've got all of this set up, I'm going to go ahead and compile this. And then I'm going to go ahead and run this. Okay, so now we can actually see all of the content for this. So we can see our 4 buttons for our header or our navigation bar. They're in this kind of upper left-hand corner. We're using a little bit of padding to keep them off of that edge, and we've got a little bit of spacing between them. In our center region, we've got that very large piece of dummy text that I included. On the left column, we've got our 2 buttons for navigating through this particular page. We've got our first paragraph and second paragraph. On the right-hand side, we've got our image, so this computer science wallpaper image, a little bit of dummy text underneath that. And then at the very bottom here, we've got our placeholder for our contact info, and then our copyright, as well as that copyright symbol, making up the content for the footer. Okay, so go ahead and close that. And then come back over here. And now what I want to go ahead and do is just create another setup for this, taking the other approach, which is to provide a no-args constructor. So I don't really provide any of the content initially, and instead I use a series of setter methods to go ahead and set the content for each one of these regions individually. So we'll go ahead and keep this for a moment so I can keep track of what goes in each region. What we're going to do is say webpage.set. And so we'll go in the same order as these 5 parameters here. So first I need to set the center. That's going to be the primary content. We then want to do the webpage.set top. This is going to be the header. We'll then do webpage.set right. This is going to be the right column. We'll then do webpage.set bottom. That's where the footer will go. And finally, we'll do webpage.set left, and this is for the left column. Okay, so now that we've done that, I can go ahead and remove all of this from the constructor itself. And so now what we're going to do is essentially just construct the border pane and then create all the content and add that individually. Okay, so we'll go ahead and compile this again and then run it, and we'll see that even though I've changed the approach, we can still get all the content exactly the same as it was before. Alright, so at this point this is going to wrap up everything about the BorderPane layout. In the next video, that's going to wrap up chapter 12, so this will wrap up all of the basics regarding JavaFX applications, and in that last video I'm going to talk a little bit about the observable list interface.